Convidamos a todos para uma conversa com o fotógrafo Gideon Mendel. O FOTO BSB não seria possível sem o apoio do FAC, Fundo de Apoio à Cultura do Distrito Federal. Início da audiodescrição. Dani Lobo, FOTO BSB. Mulher de pele clara, cabelo escuro, liso e curto, acima do ombro. Veste camiseta branca com listras horizontais finas e pretas. À sua esquerda, uma parede branca com um desenho emoldurado pendurado, vasos de plantas suspensos e atrás dela, uma grande prateleira de livros. Ana Ortega, mulher branca, de cabelo escuro, curto e ondulado. Usa um fone que cobre as orelhas e brincos pequenos e circulares. Veste uma roupa lilás. Gideon Mendel, homem branco de cabelo ondulado, esvoaçado e grisalho, e barba também grisalha. Usa óculos de armação grande e quadrada. Veste camisa quadriculada azulada por cima de camiseta escura. Atrás dele, há uma parede com duas imagens, além de uma escrivaninha e gaveteiros de madeira sobre chão de tábuas corridas. Luísa Kiefer, mulher branca de cabelo liso e preto. Veste camisa branca com listras finas escuras verticais. Atrás dela, à esquerda, uma parede com quadros e prateleiras com livros. À direita, parede branca com 2 quadros pendurados.
Boa noite a todos. É uma honra estar aqui com o Gideon hoje, com a Ana e com a Luísa. Eu vou fazer uma apresentação breve do trabalho do Gideon. Quando a gente começou a 3ª edição do festival, a gente se inspirou muito no trabalho do Gideon, porque ele vem documentando as tragédias climáticas e tem isso na carreira dele há muitos anos. Ele trabalhou, eu convido a todos até, vou colocar no link do YouTube o site dele, o trabalho dele, e o fogo, ele trabalhava com fogo, depois agora ele passou a trabalhar com as águas, com as enchentes no mundo, através do mundo inteiro, e é muito interessante porque ele deixa uma perspectiva muito humana do que acontece. E o trabalho dele mostra que não importa a riqueza, se a pessoa é pobre ou rica, ela é afetada da mesma forma. E ele tem um trabalho muito específico para mostrar isso para a gente. Ao mesmo tempo que atormenta, porque é muito belo, e você vê uma destruição e está bonito, porque ele traz essa humanidade. Então, e quando a gente pensou no habitar, resiliência, habitar na emergência climática, também foi pensando no trabalho dele. Então, foi uma inspiração para a gente, antes de tudo acontecer no Rio Grande do Sul, depois foi aquele choque. Ele acabou vindo documentar o Rio Grande do Sul, que foi um trabalho belíssimo e, quer dizer, impactante, ao mesmo tempo belo. E para explicar como é mais ou menos essa parte do trabalho dele sobre as enchentes, ele trabalha em blocos. Então, ele faz o floodlines. Então, ele fotografa, ele faz uma linha na arquitetura, às vezes dentro da casa das pessoas, às vezes fora. Na metade da linha para cima é a casa, metade para baixo é a casa inundada, dentro ou fora, e o reflexo. Isso é incrível. Depois, as pessoas submersas. E ele vai na linha, ele está sempre junto com as pessoas e elas estão lá submersas, humanas. Então, você percebe pessoas ricas, pobres, pelo mundo inteiro. E isso toca muito. E depois ele tem watermarks, que são as fotos que as pessoas perderam nas enchentes. Então, as marcas que as águas fizeram nessas fotos. E é incrível, assim, porque agora até muita gente tem fotografado isso, porque as pessoas perdem as fotos. Muitas vezes elas voltam para recuperar as fotos, elas têm coisas muito mais valiosas e elas voltam para recuperar as fotos. E foi falado sobre isso em outras conversas, então isso é muito emocionante. Então, acho que vai ser uma mesa belíssima. O trabalho dele para a denúncia de emergência climática é muito importante. Obrigado, Gideon, por seu trabalho. E as pessoas usam as fotografias dele para manifesto na Inglaterra, isso é incrível. Talvez do resto do mundo, quem sabe se a gente não vai fazer o mesmo aqui. Precisamos, né? E a Ana, ela foi a fixer do Gideon no Brasil. Ela acompanhou o Gideon chegando aqui em Porto Alegre, aliás, ele já tinha feito antes no Acre, em outra enchente, ou seja, não é uma coisa nova dele. E ela fez todo um trabalho com ele, como ele faz com os outros fotógrafos também. Então, tem o registro do Gideon trabalhando nas enchentes. Depois a gente também vai mostrar isso. Também convido todos a conhecer o trabalho da Ana. Ela é fotógrafa, artista visual, jornalista também. Tem um trabalho muito bom, eu andei pesquisando. E depois tem a Luísa, que trabalha no Matinal, e ela entrevistou o Gideon no Brasil. Então, as duas vão ser importantes para compreender agora o Gideon nessa nova enchente no Rio Grande do Sul, que aconteceu, enfim, e ainda impacta a todos. É isso, a mesa agora é de vocês.
Obrigada, Dani. É um prazer estar aqui com vocês. Maybe we could start. Dani gave us, Gideon, a brief introduction to your work. And maybe...
Thank you. That was amazing. It was really so profound and deep. No, I mean, it sounded great, and I look forward to seeing a translation of it.
Yes, maybe we could start talking. You could start talking, telling us about your experience here in Porto Alegre.
Okay. I mean, it's strange how time kind of stretches and contracts, because it now feels like years ago to me that I was in Porto Alegre. You know, it feels like another world, another time. But I left around just a little bit more than 2 weeks ago. It was, you know, a very powerful experience for me, coming to Porto Alegre. I mean, obviously, coming from London, it was a long, long journey and a long way, and you know, quite a difficult, quite an uncomfortable journey, having to, you know, kind of make the connection from Florianopolis. And I think, obviously, on one level, I was just so deeply struck by the location of the water, the depth of the water, to see a whole town, to see so many communities, you know, underwater. You know, there was obviously the center of Porto Alegre, and seeing these kind of old buildings, this beautiful historical city center underwater. But then also, you know, kind of elsewhere, being in more suburban areas, seeing so many homes, so many businesses. And, you know, it was just, I suppose, an experience of just being on boats or walking, and just the sense of this kind of endless liquid landscape. And, you know, water and reflections just being where they shouldn't be. So I think that's, on one level, just being so kind of struck by the scale and the intensity of the climate disaster, which was happening when I got there. But also, I was also just really moved by the people and the welcome I received. I mean, both from, you know, the people we met, people who were affected by flooding. People were really very open to being photographed, very keen to kind of show us their lives. But also, you know, the people I worked with, you know, kind of, you know, all the messages of support I got from other kind of Brazilian journalists and media people and other photographers. You know, I felt kind of really welcome in Brazil, and I felt there was something really important to be done. Does that answer the question?
Yes, of course it does. And maybe just to situate a bit, for how long you were here? You stayed here for more than 10 days,
Yeah,
I reckon.
And
where you've been around, I mean, which neighborhoods you were, or maybe we could start from there. Anna, interrupt me when you want.
So, I mean, there were actually technically 11 full days of working and shooting, although it was disrupted a bit by kind of one day with some kind of, I had I think some food poisoning for a day, which kind of affected me, and there was, kind of at least 2 days of constant rain. And the way it rains over there, it was pretty. I mean, I'm sure coming from Porto Alegre, you guys know it was just, the rain was just really, really extreme. I mean, Anna, why don't you go into more detail about the neighborhoods, because I think you can explain that better.
Yeah.
And by the way, before we go there, for the audience, people don't know, Anna, I'm sure you know of her. She is an amazing local photographer and journalist who was kind enough to work with me as my local collaborator. So Anna was with me kind of all the time that I was kind of making these images.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the festival for inviting us, because it's the first opportunity we have to kind of reflect more deeply on the work we did here. So I'd like to thank you for having us, and thank Luisa and Gideon for sharing this space. And yes, I can talk a bit about the neighborhoods we have been. Like Gideon mentioned, we were working for 11 days. And first, we started in the center of Porto Alegre. So the images you saw, just have seen of the buildings, they are from the city center. And it was interesting to start there, because we say it's like the heart of the city, because it's the heart of the center and the public buildings and the museums. So it's a symbolic place that was underwater and have never been before. And the last time was 1941, when we had that major flood. That everybody in Porto Alegre knows the story, but we never thought it was possible, or like we never thought it was that real, that it could happen soon and it could happen now. So so we started in the center, and then we went to actually we concentrated our work in 2 neighborhoods, which were Vila dos Papeleiros, which is a community. It's not a neighborhood, but we end up there almost by a casual encounter with people, and then we started to make connections in Vila dos Papeleiros. And it was interesting because when we got there, it's close to the center, but it's more like it's like a suburb inside the center of the city. So it's very known by the recycling process and recycling garbage, and it's a very known community here. But when we got there, they told us that media wasn't there, wasn't reaching people there, wasn't listening to people there. And I thought a lot about that, and at the same time, I know it's impossible to cover all the damage that happened in Porto Alegre and in Rio Grande do Sul, because it was major. Like we don't have, still we don't have like the real dimension of the impacts in Rio Grande do Sul and in Porto Alegre. But that was one reason why we stayed more time in Vila dos Papeleiros. And then we moved to Canoas, and we went to the most affected neighborhood called Matias Velho, which photographers here in the festival already told a bit about, but it was one of the most affected neighborhoods. So the entire place, the entire community of more than like 80,000 people had to go out of their houses. And the rise of the level was really quick, like most places and most more like poor neighborhoods. The water covered the entire house. So so those are the 3 locations that we focused in Porto Alegre and the region. We also went to the island, but the water level was so high there that we couldn't even talk to people because people weren't there. So we end up not staying like there because we wanted to talk to people. We wanted to hear what they were going through. So we went there in a moment where just were silence and water, and the levels were still in the roof. So yeah, that was the three major places we worked in.
Yeah, and it's a kind of odd thing. It was when we were planning the trip, I was really concerned. Would I be too late? Would the water still be there? Would the water be gone? But actually, looking back on the time, in some ways, I was too early for what I would like to do, because, I mean, the heart. Obviously, there's the landscape and this kind of very dramatic footage of places underwater. But actually, the kind of heart of what I do, the central kind of narrative spine, is the series of what I call submerged portraits, which are the portraits of people in the water, looking at the camera. And so we should be seeing a few of them now from elsewhere in the world. This is from when I went to Rio Grande in 2015, previous flooding there. So this is I suppose the most important part of what I do, and it's also the hardest, because of the challenge is finding people who can be photographed, finding people who can take us back to their homes. And actually, when we first got there, the water was probably too high. The people were not really even kind of returning to their homes. So it was really only in the last couple of days that we were there that I could really engage in this work. And I extended my trip by 2 days because I had a strong sense of that. And it really, most of the portraits that I did were done in the last 2 days of my time. My time there. And I guess it's a strange thing, is that people really react quite strongly just to this idea of seeing people in water. And it's kind of a little bit almost counterintuitive that if you're a photographer in a flood, you should be photographing people fleeing, or you should be photographing people rescuing their things, or it kind of goes slightly against what the rules of kind of documentary photojournalism, in that people are pausing, they are taking the time to engage the camera, and in some ways they are quite conventional portraits, but it's this context and the surrounding which makes them kind of disturbing, and it's almost a kind of distorted reality.
I'd like to talk a bit about the people. Maybe, Daniela, can we move to that PDF also, that of the process here? Because
I was going to.
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was going to ask you exactly about that. I mean, there is this very sensitive characteristic of your work, which is talking to people and portraiting they in their homes. And how was this? I mean, to approach people, to communicate, to invite them to, well, can we enter your home? I know it's disrupted. Can we just go through the devastation, and can I shoot you? So
I mean, it's kind of, it's strange. I mean, I think I'd say in general, I mean, 90% of the people we asked were enthusiastic in their response. A few people were not keen, but I mean, I think majority of people were very open and keen to sort of be witnessed, and I think with some people, it was a kind of complicated arrangement, is that we'd spoken to them on the shoreside, and we arranged a boat, and we did like a journey to the house with them as a very pre-arranged thing with some of the individuals. And sometimes it was very kind of random, like we just would bump into them in the street and they would kind of invite us, so, and, I'm always aware that there's a lot of trauma around in the situation. And, it was kind of quite odd, because sometimes people would be laughing and joking and seemingly quite lighthearted. But the moment Anna began kind of interviewing them and asking them about their experience, they burst into tears. There's that kind of sense of kind of dealing with things and maybe having a superficial level of kind of trying to be quite lighthearted, and there's also something about that sort of weird landscape of when your home is underwater, and then when there's suddenly a moment of reflection, I think it would almost kind of overwhelm people. And I think there's one other thing which we often don't think about in this situation, is that people are having this experience, but they don't really pause. They don't pause to think about it. They don't pause to kind of talk about it. So there is this kind of sudden moments, and I'm, I think, I mean, it's very important to me that in the kind of engagement, in the way that I photograph people, in the way that they engage with the camera, that they're not victims, that they're not, and it's a delicate balance, over, in this particular situation, Terence, I just filmed him going into his mother's house where he was living at the time, because he was separated from his wife, and there was just absolute chaos everywhere, and he burst into tears, and he looked like quite a tough guy, but he just like began weeping. He just burst into tears, and that's something which I filmed, but actually that footage is kind of almost too difficult to use, and you can see his eyes are pretty red, and you can see he's been crying, but there's a strength there. And actually, which is kind of interesting in this situation, is he was walking in the water, and we had a boat, and because we had a boat, his mother had been on the shore nearby, but he asked if he could fetch his mother, so his mother was in the boat and dry, and we'd explained what we were doing, and we'd kind of shown them on our phones, my kind of website, so they kind of were aware of what we were doing. And we'd been in the house, and I began to take the photograph with Terence, and his mother kind of interrupted and said, "Sorry, I think I should be in the picture as well." So she was a 70-year-old woman, and she wanted to get into the water to be photographed too. It was kind of, I mean, I wouldn't have even suggested it because she was quite old, but she, it was something she really wanted. It's funny how these photographs, this was taken in 2018 in Florida, and this is taken in Nigeria just 2 years ago. But it's interesting how the images, they're quite hard images to take, and you never quite know how many you're going to get, what's going to work, but they sort of live on, and they do really seem to speak to people on many different levels. I mean, Louisa, I mean, I know you kind of wrote an article about the work. Did your audience kind of respond? Was there kind of a reaction from your readers?
Yes, everybody was very amazed by your work, because I think they really communicate something, and there is a lot of layers in your work, because you're talking about climate change, but there's also the aesthetic thing, like the art part, there is the sensitivity, and there is the story of the people as well. So I think they have, their portraits have a lot to talk about. It's not something that you can read on your first look. You have to look, and you have to look again.
Yeah.
And
I think that's. I mean, I think the key word there is the kind of aesthetic element, because I mean, it has been kind of controversial in some contexts, of people saying, how can you make such beautiful aesthetic images which are so much about trauma? And for me, that's kind of exactly the point, is that I want people to really look, and to kind of look again, and to, that so to make them kind of visually quite seductive is part of the idea that I mean, that people, it's very easy to not look at pictures of climate change, and not look at things which it's often this desire, people don't want to, often people, I'm sure you've heard people saying that they don't want to read newspapers, they don't want to look at the news, because people want to turn away, because there's so much difficult stuff in the world at the moment. So it is, I think a lot about kind of structure and form in the process. And I mean, I think you also see quite an interesting transition. The more recent work, like this work, which is Nigeria from 2022, is kind of much more, in some ways, architectural and kind of very precisely kind of photographed. And I think that's to some extent the result of, the kind of work I began doing in really 2020 on the aftermath of fire. Is in those situations, it's such a chaotic environment that I had to find a way of structuring my images of fire very, very carefully, creating a very kind of formal, precise composition. And when I returned to do more work on flooding, that sort of instinctively, without realizing it, that approach kind of followed me. And I mean, I think, I'm sure as you and other photographers, who kind of photographed in flooding have found, I mean, there's something very visually kind of, I don't know, the word is, maybe appealing is the wrong word, but in a flooded situation, you have a flat plane of water in front of you, which kind of makes it, I don't know, for me to make these portraits, makes it very, I suppose, inverted commas, easy to make a strong picture, because it's such a simple, clear, kind of classic environment. Working in fire, and the kind of reflections you get, so although I'm aware that these are situations of kind of great trauma, in this situation that he'd just been finding, the holy copies of the Holy Quran underwater, which was like really upsetting for him, and was obviously quite traumatizing. I'm kind of, obviously very aware of the kind of reflections and the kind of formal visual elements in the photograph. So it's kind of, in a way, maybe finding a way to deliver and present this quite traumatized situation, but in a very easy to look at visually way.
So maybe Anna can talk what she was going to talk before, and about the people and when you went into their homes. How was for you, Anna, and how was this moment that you were assisting Gideon as well to talk to people and compose the picture, like direct to kind of direct the person Gideon, or if you both could talk a bit about this.
Sure.
Yeah. I really like what Gideon said about usually people going through these situations, they don't have much time. They are really worried about actually surviving. Like they're worried about resources, worried about having lost their job. Sometimes they are worried about people that are in the same situation, like their entire neighborhood flooded. So they are worried about many things at the same time. And I like what Gideon said about what happens when the photograph happened, because usually it's this time shared, and I was responsible for doing the interview. So when you look at the people and you stay there for a while with them, they started to pause something is paused, and you start to remember, and that's hard. Like the portraits are the hardest part, and at the same time the strongest part, because you need to be deal, and like me, especially because I was talking in Portuguese with the person, and hearing the story, you need to be dealing with the story of how the person was rescued, and how are the feelings in this moment. And like Gideon mentioned, many of them cried because it's so recent and it just has happened, and you're talking about the trauma. But before we started the work, and before Gideon arrived in Porto Alegre, I was very worried how this gonna be, like how I was gonna approach people in this hard situation. And that's a question many journalists also have, because it's our job to be there and to hear people, but there's a huge emotional thing you had to deal with. And but what I learned from the experience is that people want to tell, people want to show their houses. And what surprised me is that I was going there to, of course, prepared to hear about the loss, but usually people were keen to tell their life stories. Like they wanted to tell about their life, like how their house looks like, how the neighbors are always there, like drinking chimarrão, which is our typical drink, or how like this street or this neighborhood, like the son learned to ride the bike. So the memories are very fresh, and not just the traumatic memories, but also like the life memories. So when we met the people, like we were meeting also their life, like we were hearing about their stories, and that was very strong to realize. So there was this woman we met in Canoas. Her name is Fabiani, and she's one of the pictures that have already slide here.
That was the one where she's holding.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can go.
She's hugging. Yeah, she's hugging Gideon. And let's see if the picture here. Yeah, she's Fabiani. And what happened in this situation was that her and her son were in the water in Matias Velhos, and they were trying to access their house for the first time. But they didn't have the appropriate clothes, and he saw them and talk a bit with them in English, and then I talked with them, and actually we bothered them, the waiters, to go inside the house for the first time. But while we were waiting, I started the interview, and she told me a lot about her life, and that the house was not just the house to live, but also a religious place, an African Brazilian religious place we call terreiros. It was a religious house. So that is really strong, because, and that happened many times. People they didn't just lost their house, which is a lot, but also they lost sometimes 2 or 3 houses. Like sometimes they lost their job because the job was connected to the house, or they lost like their spiritual religious place, which is this case. And so there are many layers of this.
I mean, when I was with this particular house, I mean, I was just going into the house. I was just struck by it was so beautiful. You know, the kind of the decor and the paintings and the layout. And I mean, besides the house, also, you know, the upstairs had been flooded as well. And upstairs there was her husband's recording studio. Her husband's a musician, so there was a whole recording studio which had been destroyed as well. I mean, do you remember there was a picture earlier of a painting where there was a kind of peculiar reflection? That painting was inside this house as well. Yes, this one. That's I mean, that is a kind of really, I don't know, aesthetically, there's something really bizarre, isn't it? How that painting becomes a different painting, a different work of art through the reflection. You know, it could have been a reflection in the original painting, but it wasn't. It's, you know, that kind of raises kind of weird questions.
Yeah. And Fabiana, we had like a strong connection with her, and actually we stayed like the whole morning with them, and that happens a lot in the portraits. And also I think this like time is something important to mention in this work, because the portraits, and I learned that working with Gideon, are not done quickly. They take time, and this time is usually silent. So this time shared is really strong, because you that witnesses that Gideon mentioned is about like being present and being like the presence you have in that moment with this person, and you stay there. And I think this kind of makes a bit a difference than photojournalism in general, because we are in journalism, photojournalism, like hard news, we are rushing. Many times we are in a rush, and doing a work with time that we can connect more with people, it was important, and that makes the difference. And the bonds, they remain because people were staying, like they still telling me news about them. Yesterday Fabiani sent me a video of her house right now, so people are sending me many news about how they are, and like if they had gone back to work, if they are already in their house. So I think this gives me a sense that we made a connection. And usually when we were in people's house, sometimes they would say like, when everything is clean, I will invite you to come back and to drink a coffee with me. Like, and that's strong because they want us to like see their house like how it was before the flood. And this gives like perspective of future. So of course we were dealing with a lot of trauma and a lot of grief, because it's, you are mourning many things you lost, but at the same time we were dealing with perspectives of future, because all the people there were trying to imagine a future after what happens. So we have like invitations to barbecues, we have many invitations to everything, because people are seeing that.
Yeah. So, I mean, just what you see over here is, and I think over the years of my work, and it's kind of nearly 18 years, different narrative elements have emerged. And one of them is a series which I call Watermarks. And that is just an archive I've collected of people's personal flood damaged photographs. So while we were there, we encountered a few people who were dealing with their flood damaged photographs, and I took some were kind of given to me to take back. So these are some scans that I've made of them. But so these are all kind of I have a vast archive and many kind of older ones. But these are some of the new ones, and it's So this is an older one from South Carolina, and I mean it's again talking about aesthetics. There's something for me about the fact that these kind of interventions in the photographs are completely unplanned. They're completely the random impacts of nature and mold and chemistry. This is a passport photograph which literally floated past my boat in Kashmir in India. There were a couple of passport photographs which just floated past us. And for me, this becomes, in a way, a kind of a deeper statement about memory and the impact of kind of climate change on I suppose on communal memory, which is kind of represented in these photographs. And
many of the photographs, or maybe all of them, are from canoas, right? The ones we collected.
So this is one of the ones from canoas.
So that was strong. Like when we go inside the houses and people were many times putting inside the trash like the photographs, because they think like they won't be they won't keep anymore like those photographs. So many times we would explain the work and ask them if Gideon could scan and then send them back. So now we are sending these photographs back in a high quality scan, and they would say yes, of course, because sometimes they would just put in the trash. And I think that's really hard about what
people feel. So I think an instinct of feeling quite violated, and feeling that all that's dirty and thrown. So often people throw away things they shouldn't throw away, because they've been under floodwater. So things which can be recovered, but it just feels like such a violation. So often precious things and photographs, and in terms of what they kind of represent, it is kind of it's really sad that so many, and I've often just found photographs which are, lost and discarded.
Yeah, I have a very close friend who also lost her house, and her biggest worry was about the photograph. Like she was worrying, like, when I like have a child, I won't have my photographs to show them their mother as a child. Like, she was worried about how to tell her story in the future, because she was afraid of losing the photographs. So that's what also the emotional impacts of the flood. Like, we are worried with our memories, and like many people are talking about this. Like, it's not like the object, just like the physical object, but it's like the story. Like, everything inside the house has a story. Like the color of the wall, like everything you have inside. So that hurts a lot. Like the story within everything.
Yeah, and the kind of significance of objects. Danny, can you please go back to the picture of me photographing the guy in the red t-shirt? Not that one. Not that. There was a. What was his name? His name again?
Alex. His name is Alex.
So
Yeah.
Alex was someone who we met at first because he was just very active in relief and helping other people. But then he told us that his home was underwater as well, and that he actually hadn't been back to his home. That he'd been too afraid to go back to his home. He did invite us to go to his home and photograph at his home, and it was quite an emotional. It was an emotional journey. He arranged a kind of a boatman to kind of help us get there, and I'm waiting for the picture. I think it's coming up next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We met Alex.
Go ahead.
It's just fine.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. It's another one. Yes, this one. This one. Yeah.
So he was, we could be kind of, I got off the boat, and my process in this situation is, before I take a picture, I kind of follow people with my video camera, because, video, and we can talk about some more, but video is also an important element of what I do. And I was filming him walking into his home and then going inside, and I mean, so often what's interesting in Canoas is that there was a back section to the house with an upstairs, and we went upstairs, and although the water was gone, upstairs the flood had been probably halfway, it must have been kind of halfway through the upstairs rooms, and I was following him. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but he was looking for something, and then he kind of found this T-shirt, which is a T-shirt for a local football team. What is the team called, Anna?
Yeah.
Internacional.
International. Okay. So he found this T-shirt, which was, and it was, it was full of flood water. It was a kind of, it was a stinking flood water sodden T-shirt, and he kind of wrung it out and he put it on because he wanted to be photographed with that, wearing that T-shirt. So he'd gone, and that object was really, really important to him. And then it was, and I think for me that's always part of my process, is that I'm first following people and filming them before I do the photograph, and I get a sense of the environment, also where would be a good place to do the photograph. So there's always a kind of a choice I make with them of kind of where do I position people, where do we take the picture? That's always a kind of a crucial kind of question for me in the process. And
you discuss with the people, Gideon?
Yeah,
where would you like to be photographed, or do you have a special place, or I mean, how does this work?
A discussion, but I suppose truthfully, a lot
it's
of
also intuitive of you.
Yeah, it's a sense for me of kind of, it's thinking about the color and the light. Sorry, and the previous, if we can go back to the previous picture. So what was his name again?
Valdemar.
Valdemar. I mean, he was
Valdemar Estranho, o nome dele. Her name, sorry.
So I mean, finding him was a different story, because literally we on a boat and we drove past him, and he was walking through the water to go back to his house for the first time. And he kind of we told him what we were doing, and he invited us to join him. And I mean, it was quite. So I followed him going into the house, and I didn't actually see it, but I could smell it. There was a back section with an upstairs, and he went into the upstairs, and I heard him kind of. It was a bit. It was kind of. You know what I mean by keening. He was sort of, kind of. He was quite shocked. I could hear him being really shocked by something. He was kind of crying, and I think he'd found the body of his dog upstairs. And I think
it was not his dog. It was a dog. Like he found. It was not his dog, but was a dog that he thought that maybe tried to
escape,
like survive, and then stopped in his house. Because what's strong about his story is that many people went to his house because it was in a part of Matias Velho, the neighborhood, that usually wouldn't get the flood, like the water wouldn't reach the place. So many neighbors got inside his house to be safe, like they thought it was a safe place. And then the rise of the level of the water started to get higher and higher and higher. And he told me like he was really worried because not just by himself and his family, but he felt he has a responsibility. Like there are people there, there are neighbors, that are people that were there trying to be safe, and and then the water were so high. So probably like this dog is a dog from the neighborhood, and we saw a lot this scene. It's very hard to forget like many animals. And so he was very shocked by how his house is, because like many people, they got out and they stayed like 20 days without seeing their house, just seen by photos a neighborhood send if someone goes in the neighborhood. But they can't imagine, like you can't imagine it's like an unimaginable image to imagine your house, like how your house is going to be inside. So that was really strong. And he's a philosophy teacher, and he told us like he doesn't like to be photographed, like in family moments and family events. He usually is the person that takes the photo because he doesn't like to be photographed. But in this case, he felt very comfortable to and he wanted to. And he after, there's a very strong thing that happened, that he sent us a poem she wrote about how he felt in the flood. And so that was one of the strongest stories, because we stayed the time like maybe an hour, 2 hours, like a long time with him. And that's a story about like someone that helped also a lot of people, many people who were affected. Like they went to shelters or family members' house, and then they returned to help all the days, like with food or like rescue. So many of the people, most of them were like with their house underwater, and they were still like going there to help. So
I mean,
that was a big Valdemar.
Yeah, and I think just editing my pictures, looking at my pictures of him, he's because often when I'm editing pictures, I first look at the expression, so I first going close, and I just look at the expression, are the eyes closed, are the eyes open, and look at the expression. And what was really unique about him is that his expression didn't change. He didn't blink. He just looked at the camera in a very powerful way, kind of impassive, but very direct. And it was a very, quite a powerful engagement with the camera, with a completely unchanging expression. But I think you can see the house, there was a high upstairs section, and I can imagine at the time of the flood, him and the neighbors perhaps thought that the upstairs was safe, but then the water must have gone high up the upstairs as well, which, I can imagine that must have been a terrifying, traumatic moment. But that would have been...
That's what happened.
Yeah.
And the worst thing was also here and in many places in Rio Grande do Sul, the flood and the water started to go up like the level at night. So it was like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. of night. So you can imagine how like the many people we talked with, they remember this despair, like this being afraid of the worst things could happen, because it was night and just like a few boats. So he told a lot about this moment and how traumatic it was. So he has a wife, he lives with his wife, and he said his wife is still like trying to emotionally recover of that hard moment of being rescued. So and the poem he wrote says that he's trying to transform grief into like a fight, and that he mourns and misses like his life, like his routine, like people missed their lives, how it was like their house, like how everything was before the flood. So the poem elaborates a bit this.
Yeah. Why don't you find the poem and read it?
Yeah, I can read the poem. And also he after like a few days we met him, he sent the poem, and then he asked like, if you would like, I can shoot a video of myself reading the poem. And he did this, and I thought it was strong because he positioned himself in front of his house. Now the level is like the water has gone, but then you can see the destruction, and he probably asked someone to photograph him in front of his house. So it looks like he did a bit of like the portrait Gideon did of him, but now he do it himself and live saying his poem, the poem he wrote. So I will read just a bit in Portuguese. It says that a enchente nos tirou de casa, arrancou as nossas memórias, lembranças que guardamos com carinho, conversas de final de tarde com os vizinhos. Meu cachorro que sorri latindo parece dizer: descansa hoje, que teu amanhã será diferente. Não, agora nada é diferente. Os dias passam e nada muda. Até a noção de tempo perdemos. A enchente levou o ontem e o hoje. Memórias, sonhos e nosso presente ficaram jogados na calçada. Mas o futuro está em nossos corações, está em nossas mentes e braços, que com altivez dirão: vamos resistir. E tudo outra vez construir, transformar o luto em luta. É do Valdemir Stran, que é esse professor. It's this teacher we met in Canoas, and he was also trying to get inside his house. He was like in the middle of the flood, like the road looked like a river because the level was really high, and he was trying to get there. So people wanted to see their houses, even if they couldn't go inside. They really wanted to see, just to see if the house is still there, like if the infrastructure is still there. And that's also strong, because sometimes people would be happy just to see that the house, like the walls are there, like they will be able to go back inside and reconstruct, because many houses unfortunately weren't, like they didn't resist.
But I think what we kind of learned is that this was kind of the right moment to be taking the picture. You know, if we'd come 2 days earlier when the water was higher, we wouldn't have, it wouldn't have been feasible to kind of, get there. This is probably the first day it actually was possible to return. And I mean, to some extent, I regret that I didn't have a few more days of, looking at the pictures. I kind of wish I had another, it's always the problem. It always feels like a rush. There's never kind of enough time to really kind of give it. Because those portraits do take time. You can't rush them.
I was going to ask Gideon. Well, I heard a lot you talking and just processing everything you said and Anna said, and I think Anna said something about the time that you share with people, which is very powerful, and also how this might differentiate your work from photojournalism. And I don't know, this is a very long discussion about photojournalism and art and everything, but I think I read on your artist statement that you think you work in somewhere between art, activism, and photojournalism, and I think that this is might be something for us to explore a bit here, since we are in a photojournalism festival.
Sure.
And yeah, maybe we can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because I mean.
And sorry, just to compliment, and I was also thinking that your work is very powerful, because we've been here for more than half an hour now, and we've talked a lot about the people, about the trauma of the people, and we're talking maybe more about the people than photography in itself, because that's it. You look at your portraits, you have that person, and you want to know about that person. And now we have this moment to know what you and Anna have been doing, how these people were, and what were their stories. And I think this is something that is also that we might also relate to these layers of your work. It's not just a portrait, you have the story, and and this might be this mix between art and documenting and everything. If you could talk a bit about that.
Okay, so I think firstly, I come from a background, and I come from a tradition of kind of documentary background, but I think I'm also, I've become increasingly aware in recent years of the extent to which kind of in lots of kind of areas of kind of philosophy and kind of art criticism and theory that practice is kind of questioned and challenged. Both that in terms of the right, what right do you have as an outsider, as a photographer, to appropriate other people's bodies and include them? There are lots of, and I think the questioning, I think a lot of documentary photographers and photojournalists have felt very threatened by that kind of questioning and haven't wanted to even go there and engage with it. But I think for me, it's been very important to hear those kind of challenges and hear those questions and kind of find responses to them. And so I think, I think some photographers, and I think I've seen some young photographers get to a position where the only thing they can photograph is themselves, because, or everything else is kind of is questioned in terms of, what right do you have to do it? But I think for me, through this process, my kind of engagement with people and the kind of meeting I have, and the kind of photographic meeting I have with people is really important. But I think in parallel with that, there's my kind of, I suppose, in different ways throughout my kind of journey, my 40 years, I've been photographing for 40 years now. And I think along that route, kind of activism and kind of engagement with organizations who are trying to change things, from my work photographing the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, to my work on HIV and AIDS, to my climate work, engaging with organizations and individuals who are trying to change things and to create what I've called tools of visual activism. It's very important to me that my work gets used. And, but don't also, I wouldn't want to kind of glorify myself, because I'm also an insecure photographer like anyone else, and I like to have my work used, and I like, we all want to be appreciated, and we all want our work to be seen and exhibited and displayed. But I think what I've come to appreciate is that my work, and I think I was explaining to you in our conversation, it feels like years ago, Louisa, is that if you think of almost like a pyramid version, as my work is kind of functioning in the world in three different ways. The one side of that triangle is my work, even though it's kind of a challenge to the documentary journalistic approach, it still sits very comfortably in the media. My work is often published in, the landscapes I did at Porto Alegre were published in the Guardian newspaper, and I think because it's aesthetic in some ways, the works sit very comfortably in kind of media. My portraits are published all the time from National Geographic. We're in conversation with a major Brazilian publication about publishing my portraits. So my work sits very comfortably in a media, documentary, newspaper, magazine context. Although I spent many years working as a photojournalist, it's not something I really do anymore, partly because of my own transitions, partly because the nature of the marketplace of photojournalism has changed. I was a photojournalist through the 90s, which was perhaps the last decade of functioning photojournalism, when people like me were sent around the world to do photojournalistic stories. But I think that is part of kind of photographic history now. The other area where my work is kind of increasingly seen and seems to really speak to people is in the gallery context. And so my work, since I began this project in 2007, my first exhibition of it, proper exhibition in an institution, was in 2012. But since then, I've probably had something like 40 or 50 different exhibitions of the work in different ways. And it's always been added to, from being part of the ICP Triennial in New York to, an exhibition at the Photo Festival in Arles in 2017. Currently, I've got a very big exhibition at the Avesta Gallery in Sweden, and at a environmental film festival in Torino in Italy. I've got two exhibitions happening at the moment. Last year, I had a big display of the work at the Photographers Gallery in London. It was a big outside display. And my work functions very well in kind of outside exterior displays. So it's increasingly being seen in the kind of gallery, museum, art context. But then perhaps most importantly to me, it also has a life, and a kind of a growing life in climate activism. Really beginning, initially around about 2017, 2018, in the Fridays for the Future marches, and then with Extinction Rebellion and Greenpeace in London. But my work has been, I should have sent you some pictures of that, Daniela, but my work is, used in many, many different kind of protests. Most recently, I've been collaborating with both Greenpeace and an organization called Money Rebellion, which has been targeting banks and, kind of financial institutions. And we've kind of been developing, with Money Rebellion, we've been developing an interesting way of exhibiting the work, is that not necessarily just not carrying the works as placards, but actually creating kind of exhibitions in a protest context. We've made some beautiful big prints, but which can easily be carried. And the people holding the works kind of dress in black and take on the formal approach of almost being like gallery docents, You know, and that's something, you know, there were pictures displayed and used last week at a protest against kind of Morgan Stanley, the financial firm in London, which is kind of, you know, investing billions and billions in fossil fuel projects. So that is a, you know, a big area of my engagement, and, you know, I'm really happy to see my work used in that environment, and it seems to work. It seems, you know, I think people who are part of the protest feel that it kind of engages audiences and engages people in different sorts of ways, rather than just a simple kind of placard. But you know, the one thing I haven't done yet, and the one thing I'm working towards, is making a book of the work, and it's kind of, for me, it's, you know, people have said I have an addiction and it's impossible for me to stop, and maybe once you do a book, you have to kind of create a full stop, and that's kind of a hard thing to do as well. I think you've seen in some of the photographs is that I'm not only a photographer in this situation. I'm also working very much as a filmmaker and a videographer, and shooting video is an important element of what I do. And over the years, I've created numerous video pieces. I mean, just before I came to Mozambique, and not to Mozambique, to Portugal, to Brazil. Sorry, I'm getting confused. I'm getting my Portuguese language countries confused here. It wasn't Mozambique, it was Brazil. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting old. But I've made various video pieces, but I think the most significant one is something which I've just really finished recently, is a piece I called Deluge, and it's a 5-channel video piece, which and then kind of puts together a narrative of flooding around the world. And you know, the kind of frustration to some extent is that, you know, for this show in Sweden, we've got a very big kind of immersive installation of this work, and the work I shot in Brazil previously was a very important part of it. But once you finish a piece, it's very hard to break it open as well. But that video piece develops a narrative where, for example, you see 5 people from 5 different countries all entering their homes at the same moment, and, you know, exploring their houses. So you see, the reason to have the 5 screens is that you can see the same experience happening in different places around the world. Daniela, is it worth showing a bit of that? Do you have? Did you get the download?
And you show that as an installation, Gideon?
No,
or
just
like, how do you
could show
spatially for us?
No, I can add later, but I think we have to make another conversation.
Okay, all right. Okay, show it another time. So, Louisa, so I've actually shown it in 2 different ways. When I initially conceived of it, I thought of it as 5 screens side by side, which becomes almost like one screen when you see this, because often I follow the movement, and there's the same movement happening.
Like in a line?
In a line, you know, so it almost becomes one screen. And that is the way I conceived of it. But I worked with the curator. I've got it's actually the 3rd show at the Asia Society in New York. The video piece is showing there as part of a group show called Coal and Ice, curated by Susan Myzelis. And the curator there, Jorinde Fries, and along with Susan, wanted to make it immersive, so that they've taken a 4-sided room, and each side of the room is one projection. So you go into it, and you can never see all the screens at the same time, that you're being surrounded. But although it wasn't the way I conceived of it, it was actually quite effective. So for the show I've got in Sweden, it's also immersive. It's like 5 screens with spaces in between them. So you kind of surrounded by the screens, and also there's a strong audio landscape as well. So, I mean, you know, I would, you know, love to show this work in Brazil, but also it would be great, you know, I shot a lot of video when I was in Brazil now, and I kind of feel maybe I need to make an installation, make some piece just from the Brazil work. I mean, I'm sort of torn. Do I kind of break open my edit of the Deluge film and bring in the recent material, or do I create a sort of standalone piece just telling that recent story? I haven't quite, and I'm still, at the moment, I'm busy looking at the footage, and it's a lot of work. I mean, in some ways, editing photographs is much quicker and much easier than editing video, you know, to kind of absorb. So I'm in the middle of like slowly working my way through the kind of video material.
Well, at the beginning of this video, when I presented your work in Portuguese, I mentioned the protest pictures,
sure.
And I think they are amazing. Especially, we need this here too now. Now we are discussing in Congress the use of the margins of the beach to construct at the margins of the beach. So it's surreal. We don't know if we are going to have those margins in the future, in 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how people cannot see what's going on in the world. So your work shows us that.
I mean, I didn't set out, I don't want to, I've kind of felt to put my work as part of activism, but, sometimes people want to talk to me as if I'm a climate change expert. I'm also I've done all this work on HIV, and sometimes, people want to speak to me as if I'm an expert, a medical expert on HIV. Somehow, if you put your foot in an area, people often think you know more than you do. I mean, it's sort of, I think I got involved. I was kind of inspired in a way. I first began wanting to make work on climate change when I had young children, and I began to be concerned about the kind of the future and how they would be dealing with the world when they were my age. But now, I think it's clear, from your experience, and in particular, that climate change impacts are kind of on top of us at the moment. It's, I think with, I know where I live in London, I live close to a river, and, I kind of think, what's going to happen when the barrier fails, it's something which initially I thought it's the life of my children, but now I think it's actually going to be my life. I mean, I think what was unusual for me in this trip is that I've never really worked before with someone who was directly impacted by the floods. It's always to some extent been an outsider, and Anna is someone whose home, luckily you live a few levels above the flood, but your apartment block was underwater. So I think that's, I think it was in some ways probably harder for you, but also maybe also important for you to be doing what we were doing. I mean, for you to be, your life was displaced. You weren't living at home. You were, it was kind of, in some ways you were dealing with those practical kind of being flooded kind of issues, but at the same time working with me and kind of visiting the floods. I mean, I'm imagining you wouldn't normally have wanted to go to the flood zones if we hadn't have been doing this project.
Yeah, I wouldn't have seen that close. Like, I maybe I would do one or another work like as a journalist, but I wouldn't have this experience of seeing like 11 days. Like we work about like 10-12 hours a day, so like really intense, in an intense mode, to be seeing the huge destruction, because it's so close. Like, something about the flood that is weird, that sometimes we would go to another neighborhood here in Porto Alegre that wasn't flooded, and life looked like more normal. So like looking like it doesn't look like the same city, and it happens many times, and it's still happening actually, because like even though like the flood affected the whole territory, the possibility of recovering is very different depending on the region, if it's like a suburb or it's in the center. I was displaced by the flood. I had to be out of my house during 30 days. And luckily, like my house wasn't affected with water, but neighbors for the third floor lost their house. So, but I live in a neighborhood that is close to the center, and like the authorities made faster to clean when the water level went down. So that makes a huge difference, because sometimes we are seeing a lot this. We have like neighborhoods in Porto Alegre, like Saringi, and even like Vila dos Papeleiros, the place we have been. Since it's like a suburb area, like everything takes more time because of the authorities. They take much more time to make like reconstruction, or like make again like the roads that are damaged, or help people to even put their furniture away, because all the furniture is now in the streets. So that marks a lot, because the territory got all flooded, but the conditions to recover are very different depending your like background, your income, your like financial possibilities, and that extend elevates the inequality in this moment. So that's something that happens, and being affected directly, and having like many like close friends and family, like many people close to me lost their houses. So I think that marks a difference from like what Gideon said, that in other occasions, like in other work he did, like people would come also from another place. And if you are part of the community, I think like I had a really strong sense of responsibility, like the ethics, because that's like I'm always worried with what stays after we go out. So I'm always worried in any time, but I think in a time where like we are living like a tragedy, and like like this hard situation is even more important. So it's your community. So when we would go like the center, like the images we are seeing, I was telling it look like this is the art museum. I go like every week, like this is the public market. I go to buy meat every week. Like I go there every week. Like it's the public market is one of my favorite places in Porto Alegre. To photograph, and I was always telling Gideon stories about to those places, because they are not just buildings, they are buildings with stories. And I think that marks the difference between like being from the place and going from other place, because you know the stories about that you have a close relationship, we have memories, so they matter a lot for you. And this happens always when we go like to Canoas. I don't know very well because I'm not from the city, but the people we met there, they see their stories all over. So they see like the bakery place they go, they see like the neighbor's house. So I'm sure it has a different emotional impact, but it was in a sense important to me to do this work. I told Gideon, and I talked to many people who asked me how emotionally it was to me, and I think I also talked to the people we photographed together. Like they were saying like the work you do is also important, like many others. Like we have this sense of doing something that maybe our work can contribute, like can add and can help people not to forget. And if this happens, it's already a lot. So
I think that's
important.
No, I mean I really kind of get that and appreciate it. I mean, Louisa, I mean, you also live close by. I mean, and you were kind of writing about it and being there. I mean, how was it for you?
Well, everything is really surreal here. I live in a neighborhood that is far away from the water, so it's this sense of like a normal life, as Ana was saying. But I work as well at Casa de Cultura Mário Quintana, which is one of the places, one of the most famous cultural places in the whole state.
Which I photographed as well.
Which you photographed, and which was still completely underwater. And I've been there after the water has gone down, and it's very surreal just to be there and imagine that everything was underwater a few days ago. So I think we are all coping with what we've seen and what we are living, and this is not something that we will have like a complete answer, or it's something that's going to go along with us through the rest of our lives, I think. And the perspective that the climate change is not getting better and we still have a lot to do. It's something very difficult.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think as you kind of probably explained to me as well, is that what we kind of witnessing is it was a really toxic combination of, insane levels of rain caused by climate change, combined with climate denialism and kind of administrative government incompetence. So when you combine administrators and politicians who come from a kind of climate denialist position with climate change.
We do have a very powerful system to avoid flooding in Porto Alegre, since we had the flood in 41. But a lot of the bombing houses, they lack maintenance that the public power should have provided, and they did. And we know now that they were aware of this for a few years. So places like neighborhoods like Menino Deus, where Ana lives, it wouldn't have flooded if the system were properly working. So we have a lot to process inside and outside.
I mean that is just, and I think the kind of combination of like real things happening in climate change with this kind of austerity politics is just such a kind of difficult and dangerous combination. And I mean, I think it also makes me aware that there's sort of at a time in the world where you most need everyone, countries, organizations, institutions, businesses, everyone needs to work together to act quickly now. Any kind of scientist, anyone who knows what's going on, can see and is saying, shouting, this is the time we need to be doing stuff and acting together in a world which is more fractured than ever, and people to seem to have less and less capacity to be working together and kind of finding any kind of global collaboration. So it's an alarming situation, and I'm so sorry that you Anna, and your community, and that you were kind of so affected by it. But I think many other places around the world are likely to be having similar experiences. I mean, on another note, I mean, there's something which kind of happened, which I thought it might be interesting to talk about. Anna, your and my experience of it when we were working in canoes, because I think we had quite different experiences, and we came to it from very different kinds of perspectives. But we on our first day of working in canoes, we were on a boat, which is driven by someone who wasn't perhaps that experienced in driving a boat, and probably shouldn't have been driving a boat. And he managed to hit the boat on something, and our boat began flooding and our boat sunk. And it was just by coincidence, this was at a place where there was a pet food business. It was just, we took the boat into there was a business where these two guys were busy kind of cleaning out the business. And for me, and it's one thing I often felt as a photographer, this was a crisis, but it was also an opportunity, because it was an opportunity to get off the boat and photograph these two guys at the business, And tell me about your perspective.
Yeah, I was really afraid actually, because yeah, we were dealing with the water every day, but we know it's not safe. Like it's like polluted water. But what we observed also was that like many people were dealing with the water without protection, like without the appropriate clothes. So yeah, so at this moment, I was one of the hardest moments. I was afraid, like, but we were luckily we had help, and like we were rescued after. But that's an experience that maybe I wouldn't photograph, but Gideon was aware, like that maybe he could manage the situation. And
I mean,
sometimes I think it's good, like the different perspectives of the moment. Yeah.
It was probably the hardest moment between us in that situation, because I think for me, I was trying to grab the moment, and there was a, it was just actually kind of coincidentally where the boat ended up was a place where there was a photograph to be made, because it was also quite a visually astonishing space. I mean, in a way, it's a pity that this whole situation wasn't documented, because our boat was full of people. It wasn't a boat we had control over. It was a boat which was kind of helping people, and it was full of people, and it basically began to sink. And we went into the space of the business, and everybody climbed onto, there was some things out of the water which people were able to climb onto as the boat sunk. And I got out, and I kind of, I suppose, I mean, I think there was a moment when I was photographing in South Africa in the 1980s, where I sort of learned that, when the police fire tear gas, or the kind of shooting happens, when like violence breaks out in that situation, your instinct is to run and to flee. But actually the interesting photographs happen if you don't run and you turn around and you face things, which isn't always the wisest or safest thing to do, but it's kind of sometimes the kind of photographically successful thing to do. So yeah, and maybe I'm not scared. I don't get scared enough.
Yeah.
So that tells us that you are a photojournalist after all.
Well, I think I have.
You're right.
I use my photojournalistic.
The background is there.
The skills you have to operate, the skills you need as a photojournalist. I think I was a very good photojournalist, and I had those visual but also kind of skills of working in the world, which I do use for this. Although the output and the product, it's a debate. Isn't really certainly not conventional photojournalism, but might fit into the area of what people call new photojournalism.
But Gideon, by now you are already more used to than us than being in the water. No,
yeah.
I mean, you've been to a lot of floods, so this is kind of a natural place for you. I've never been on a situation like this, but for you it might be a bit like, okay, just another one. I mean, you're not that afraid than we are.
Yeah, I suppose the question is, what is the worst that could happen? What is the worst thing that could happen in this situation? And it's kind of, I didn't, I suppose I was concerned because my cameras get wet. I wasn't really concerned for my own safety, but it was more, but are the cameras safe? And obviously I was concerned about you, Anna, because you were, you were really worried, and other people that were kind of worried.
I was worried, but sometimes it was good for us that I was worried. I was worried in some situations, but I think it was interesting, like, to mention this, because that was probably, I think, the hardest moment between us. But at the same time, I learned, like, to trust Gideon, because he he knows, like, it's like Luisa said, like, he knows how to deal with this environment of flood. And for us, it's very new, like, it's very scary, and still scary at many times you have been to this situation. But if you have already been once, I think you know some things that being like in the experiencing first is different, right? So I think it was interesting, like our different backgrounds, like our different experiences that combined work to make happen. Like, I could also give Gideon like like the things, you know, just because you are from that place. So we could always like dialogue, and I think that was a thing that in that moment was like a scary moment, but we could like have those different perspectives living together.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, some of my experience, I'm often thinking in relation to previous experiences. So when I was working in Kashmir in 2014, I was filming someone who was walking through the water, and I had a brand new Canon EOS 5D Mark III around my neck, and I had the video camera in my hand, and I was following him, and I was kind of following him quite carefully, but I just stepped into a ditch, which he must have walked over. So I fell down. I was kind of up to my neck in water, and the video camera kept up, but my other camera went into the water and I'd literally bought it 3 days before the day I left London, and so I'm very aware, never carry two devices. I'm always, I always have this very strong thing, always, have one device somewhere else in the boat, safe, and, because I'm working with the video camera and the stills camera. So these things kind of affect me, but also I do a lot of walking in the water and shooting video, and I'm always sometimes very conscious about the route that I'm taking. And, often I'm walking backwards, but I've kind of done that route before. And I'm kind of thinking very, very carefully while I'm walking backwards, like where my feet are going, have I walked, so there's, I know I'm taking risks, and I'm risking falling in the water with my camera, which, happened, I had one fall, I had one fall in the water, but I got wet, but the camera was okay. I kept the camera out, but I'm kind of balancing the risk. I know what I'm doing is crazy in some ways. It's kind of, no, organization would really, in terms of insurance, what I'm doing is completely doesn't make any sense, because the risks I'm taking and with expensive equipment are kind of crazy. But at the same time, I kind of know what I'm doing, and I have quite strong instincts, both about safety and where to go and kind of what to do.
That's nice. Well, I think we have almost 1 hour and a half of conversation, so we are approaching the end of it, sadly. But it was very important to talk to you all, to know about the experiences you guys have, Anna and Gideon together, to know Luisa. Thank you very much to participate at this festival. When we had the theme of the festival this year, it was kind of inspired on your work too. So, and while we had the call for the presentations, the photographers, about the climate change, the emergency, we had the situation in Rio Grande do Sul, and now we have the fire in Pantanal. So it never ends. Now we are not accepting more material, but if we had, we will be showcasing the situation now in Pantanal. It's burning all over again.
Is that
now
in the north of Brazil? Where is that?
Wait, I was thinking that we didn't talk about Gideon's fire pictures as well, because he has flood and fire pictures, and the fire pictures are really amazing as well. And I haven't touched that subject, but it's a lot to talk about. So this goes, when you go to Pantanal, we do another round.
Or maybe Amazon. Well, it's not something that we can, but it's something that is happening now, and we know it's gonna happen. It's gonna be worse all over the world. So now you can go to Florida, because now it's having flood. It never ends. So it's important for us to have this conversation, to protest, because I have kids. It's not, we all have to leave. The world's gonna continue, not us, but well, we have to construct something to stay here comfortable. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Luisa. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Gideon.
I really appreciate the Brazilian experience, and kind of building a kind of an audience for my work in Brazil. I really appreciate that. It's important to me.
Bye, guys.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.